Hello and welcome to our session today. I'm Dava Haley Mitchell. I am the founder of this Soul series, and I am delighted to have with me Jean Schnode-Bolin, who is someone who has been one of my sheroes for many years. I was just reminding her, telling her that she was actually someone whose books were very central to my dissertation, which I finished back in 2005. So I was just honoring you and thanking you for how long you've really been at it with your writing, your speaking, you're a Jungian analyst, you're also faculty of the Shift Network, and very close to my heart, you are also such a powerful advocate for women and really someone who is bringing your activism and your spirituality together, which I think is something that is now becoming much more common, but you've really been paving that path for a long time, and so it's an honor to have you.
Oh, thank you. I've been walking the path. I don't know about paving it.
I would disagree, but you know, most people know you for your work that's around the archetypes, and that's how, you know, you've become very well known and your books have been so widely distributed. But I feel like one thing people may not know as much about is a very small book you wrote that is very powerful called The Millionth Circle, that really talks about women's circles. And I know that that book was also key in disseminating. Now there's so many women's circles all over the place, but I know you had a very interesting journey with that book that also ended up taking you to the UN, and I wanted to have you share a little bit about that.
It is a little book, and it is The Millionth Circle, How to Change Ourselves and the World.
Yes.
And it was published in 1999 when I was working on Goddesses and Older Women. And the synchronicities that happened brought it into me and from me into the world. And when I knew that I needed to write, I came back from Grace Cathedral, Save of the World Forum. There was the energy of it all, and I was connected with my own anti-nuclear proliferation energy, which was based on the story of the 100th monkey. And the combination of being there, thinking about the 100th monkey, thinking about what was going on, and it was like, bingo. Millionth Circle, 100th monkey, Millionth Circle, change the world. Mm-hmm. So I wrote out the whole idea of morphic fields and morphic genesis, which Rupert Sheldrake had presented, and it tells us how we can change the world. And so I wrote it up in like 4 or 5, 6 computer pages, and I didn't quite know what to do with it. And then synchronicities worked it into being at least big enough to be a fat book, a fat brochure rather than just a brochure. And then I called up my publisher on something else and asked her, it was like this, I sort of have a book. You write small books, maybe you would be interested. And she said, well, what's the subject? And I said, it's on women's circles. And she said, we have been looking for a book on women's circles for 2 years now. And we are working on our catalog right now, and we have 1 empty space. Send it over.
Wow.
So it got published before Goddesses and Older Women. And it went on to the world. It was brought by a woman who lived close by to the Parliament of World Religions in South Africa. Went from there to Geneva. And then I get a telephone call that said, this is what happened with the book. We want to organize a Millionth Circle initiative. We would like you to come, and we would like to use the name of the book. Okay. So I found at that organizing meeting that 3 of them were NGO heads at the UN, non-government organization heads. And so the Millionth Circle initiative and the Millionth Circle website was born out of that, and there was, and then what happened is that the little book took me, in a sense, to the UN, where I wouldn't have been there at all. But I was, and I assumed when I was there that of course there was going to be a Fifth Women's World Conference. We had known about the one in Beijing, and okay, let's go to the next one.
Well, you've been advocating that for so long, and why do you feel it's so important? Because I know you've been carrying that torch also for a long time.
Because it's so intuitively right. It is so absolutely intuitively right, and it becomes more and more right as the years go on. So that last year, going to Washington, D.C., and going to the Women's March, and being in that sea of, I think it was easily 500,000 people were in that march.
I was just reading actually that march is actually the largest single day demonstration in U.S. history, and they estimate it, depends on who went, but for about 4 million. That's what I saw, 4 or 5.
Well, in the world, it was the largest resistance movement. It was in 673 cities across the world.
Yeah. Right, so this is like a symbol of there's. I was saying to you before that there's something that feels different, but I would love your perspective because you've been walking this path, but it feels like there's something that's coming to a head kind of finally within the women's movement and the way women are really rising up even more than they have in the past.
There's something stirring in the psyches of individual women who've been affected one way or another, maybe by their mothers, maybe because they were there themselves. For the women's movement of the 70s, and then watching the word feminism become a dirty word. I can do all these things I can do now, but I'm not a feminist, that whole phase. And then to find that last year, not only did we have the marches, but feminism was the most popular word in the Merriam-Webster dictionary.
Interesting.
Feminism is the word of the year.
Yeah, and what it's interesting because I obviously grew up in a different time than you, but feminism was never really a dirty word in my experience. And so you're talking about the phase when people didn't want to be feminists because they were seen to be kind of anti-male. Was that the reason people were not as embracing of that term? Because I always have been, and in my whole world, it's been a different experience. So,
well, there was a negative stereotype.
Mm-hmm.
That younger women wanted to dissociate themselves from. And they also were ignorant of the fact that what they took for granted happened because of the women's movement.
Of course.
So they didn't know their own history.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being very annoyed at that. Because I would think, what do you mean? Why do you think you can do what you can do? You can go to medical school, law school, engineering school, all these things that you just take for granted.
Exactly.
Who do you think made it happen?
Right.
And then I saw Ken Burns's documentary on how women got the right to vote, and I was really impressed at how hard it was for us to get the right to vote, and how the women who got it for us, they were amazing. Yeah. And did I ever think, oh, I get to vote because of them, thank you very much? No, I didn't. I took it for granted. This is a major lesson to me about how when something succeeds, it becomes a new norm.
Mm-hmm.
And so
thank the goddess on many levels. That there's a lot of things that I've grown up that have been the norm.
Yes.
Because of all that came before. But I think it's really important to know on whose shoulders you're standing and why we do have the privileges. That's why in my, whole experience, I've always considered myself a feminist. Mm. I never considered it to be.
You knew some of the history.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. But also, it's always been a positive thing. So it's just interesting to see your perspective on that too. And it feels like it has, reached its day where it's very, very popular, not just women, but men too. That was really inspiring to me to see that the first Women's March, that there were so many men that were also part of it. And that, this movement it's not really just about women, it's really about equality, and it's about, the spectrum also of the feminine and what's defined as the feminine. But it's gotten very politicized, but I see it as being, extremely exciting, even though it's at times daunting, frustrating, challenging, exhausting, all of these things. But at the same time, it feels like there's something happening. There's a quickening that's happening, and there's this tide. I feel like it's not brand new, but it's like the tide is getting higher and moving faster, and more people are willing to stand their ground and speak out and speak up and not be silenced. And it's, to me, that's really exciting.
Oh, it's very exciting for me too. It really feels as if, me too.
Yes, yes. Also.
Because there is this a sense of when
I did.
A man or a woman, but when a woman especially,
and it feels
instead of holding back, speaks out, or takes part, goes to a march, and finds herself surrounded by these people that believe as she does in empowerment and equality, and that the energy in Washington and other places was so nice, meaning respectful, meaning that there were kids, there were men, there were grandparents, there were lots of people all there because it mattered. And the movement of that doesn't come from hostility and power, but comes from someplace about what's right. The soul work of activism is what I would see this to be. And the connection with our spirituality, like the Circle book that I wrote, is about having being a circle with a sacred center. And that sacred center, because I'm also a Jungian analyst, resembles the archetype of the largest self, which stands for the archetype of meaning. It stands for divinity or the Tao, whatever you call it. That it is what gives our lives a sense of soulfulness and connection with other people. So if we're in a circle around a sacred fire, and you know, women do that naturally. They put a candle in the middle, and that's Hestia, the goddess, who was in the fire at the center of a round hearth. And what happens is, when you declare something a sacred space, by the small ritual of doing something as simple as that, it's like you create a field, and every time you come together and start that circle, it's like you drop into it. And the more that you meet together, the more you drop into it. And it's like a cauldron or an energy that you put energy in and you get energy back. In my particular circle, I emphasize something that I didn't emphasize in the book, which the need for periods of silence or prayer, where where whatever you've talked about, you then want to either ask for energy to help it or something to bless it, but you don't put it in words. Everybody just goes into silence and does whatever they do to draw in that sacred energy. And because I have been moved by being in a circle myself over the years, and had a sense of when circles get in trouble, the little book has also ended up being condensed information, because it looks like poetry, the part that was how-to. Because once I wrote the brochure part of it, which is the whole point, you know, it still wasn't even a little book. But then to write a how-to, another accident happened, which I typed in something and it read like poetry, and so I continued the whole book like that, the rest of the book. And so when it came to circles in trouble, which circles do get into trouble, because their relationships, like every relationship, it can get into trouble. Well, to have some insights into circles in trouble, when it's a sacred circle, there are means also to get help with that. And then I kept moving through that with Urgent Message from Mother, Gather the Women, Save the World, and that came out of going to the UN. If I had not gone to the UN and been amazed by my experience of being inspired and also really informed and distressed at what was happening to women and children all over the world. And also being inspired because the women who were talking about it had themselves usually been through the experience, that they were helping other women to survive. And they were inspiring, the women on the ground who were making a difference. And the NGOs and non-governmental organizations from all over the world, I would go from one to another and listen to them talk about what they did and why they did it. And I was moved by it, and moved by how change was happening. And the idea of urgent message from mother being the mother principle, that the mother principle in men and women, but mostly in women, that cares about the children, the animals, the trees, that care about that represent the great mother, which is like the earth.
Mm-hmm. And when did you write that book?
2000 and something.
Mm-hmm. 2000 and something. But I think, even now when I look around at what's happening on the earth, I feel that, as you say, that urgency, there is from Mother, I would say also from Mother Earth, in terms of, the amount of, when I see the fires and the floods and the devastation that's going on, so many natural disasters, it's almost to me as if Earth Mother herself is kind of like saying, hey, like almost I'm going to shake you off, you humans, unless you really respect me on a deeper level. That's, one way of seeing, like she's giving us an urgent call to start paying attention, not only to the environment, which I think is, suffering so greatly, but also to just like how life is going here. It's like a wake-up call. And I know you wrote that book a number of years ago, but it feels like the message from Mother is pretty urgent right now.
See, the whole thing changed when we saw the image of Earth from outer space. Mm-hmm. It was the first time that humanity saw Mother Earth and she was beautiful. Mm-hmm. That image, that mandala, she was beautiful. And that was when we went from children who viewed the earth just in relationship and as children and adults who are still in their non-adult phase, where they talk about their real mothers, just in terms of what she did or didn't do for them. Mm-hmm. When you get to be an adult woman, you see, or man, you see your mother as vulnerable, as beautiful, as having problems, just as we can look at Earth. Mm-hmm. She's beautiful. She needs our help, just as our mothers will need our help as they grow older and they aren't able to do the kinds of things they did when they were young and vigorous. Then it's up to us. So this is heeding the call to look after Mother. Mm-hmm. And so it came out of the Millionth Circle, and then the other is the last one of this particular series is moving toward the Millionth Circle, which is energizing a global women's movement, which is why I am such an advocate for a 5th Women's World Conference. I want to. I really know it's important to energize what is in women, and when I saw that the women marching and was part of them. Every single one of us got there because something in us made us decide to take the airplane or the walk or whatever. Mm-hmm. So we responded to some call to do what we did on the January 21st.
And it's continuing. I know, hopefully it's going to be something that will continue year after year, and I know, it is continuing. But I think there is something when you realize how, the power of one is great, but when you realize how many of us, I know that was my feeling. I was not in D.C., but I was in San Francisco, and there was more than 1 million of us there, and in so many different places. So it feels like, there's an intensity, there's an excitement, there's something happening, but I feel like in that intensity is almost, we need role models, and we need sisters and guidance for really how to navigate this particular time, which feels, as a woman in a woman's body, it feels intense. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about your circles, is it really creates a space for women to, be able to share their stories, share what's working, share it, organize in different kinds of ways, but also to have a place to find guidance, to find mentorship. And so many circles are existing, but I know there's probably listeners out there today who also would like to be a part of a circle and aren't part of one. And what I really appreciate is that you make it so accessible, that it's not just someone who's a trained facilitator, but that, anyone who is called to bring together a group of women and set a sacred context is empowered to do that.
Because they now step into the field that's already created. Mm-hmm. The whole idea of the 100th monkey Millionth Circle truly is happening. It's easier and easier for women to form circle to the sacred center. And then once you're in it, not only do you have the women in the circles that have your back. So if you are going to speak truth to power, if you're going to do something that you've never done before, this circle knows you are doing it. And if it is a spiritual circle, they might meditate or pray or ask for energy for you to go do it. Mm-hmm. And you go into the world feeling supported by that.
Yeah.
And so it's like being women don't take to being the hero. The heroine is very different. The heroinic quest often, which women in general are on, is that things are difficult and you're called to respond. Mm-hmm. And you didn't choose, like this isn't a great adventure that you chose to be on. More, it is where you are and you can either do something or not. Mm-hmm. And as you step up to do what you are doing, you can either be a victim or you can step in with your sisters to make a difference. Mm-hmm. And as you do, you become more authentically empowered inside yourself. And you know that you're not in it all by yourself either. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think women as a gender like to do that Lone Ranger sort of, hero thing. Mm-hmm. Because
people do, but it's not as innate.
No, it isn't. Yeah. It isn't, because we respond physiologically much more to conversation. And sharing what we know and supporting each other. It's the response to stress. It's oxytocin and estrogen.
And I know you were contrasting that with the male response, mm-hmm. the flight or fright.
Flight or fight and testosterone and adrenaline. Very different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so then how can women harness that knowledge to, you were saying it as a way to combat stress, even that there's conversation and there's that's part of like that, even being part of a women's circle is a way to.
Or whenever you are present in a mixed circle, your presence, if you will speak up from that place of being connected, what happens is it makes it possible for the men to sort of not have to do fight or flight. Mm-hmm. That the need for women to be present when at every stage where decisions are made is so real. Because and it allows men to move into their more nurturing feminine side, which they have. But if they do it with just guys, they hold back. Mm-hmm. But as soon as women are present, it's possible to open the conversation widely. And I learned that as a resident at Langley Porter UCSF, when I went as a resident of San Quentin into the unit that in which the guys had a year before they were going to be discharged. Mm-hmm. And what I found and learned from the professor who brought us in, this was Harry Wilmer, that as long as one woman was present in the group of men, they could talk about their concerns about their wives and their children and how were they going to be greeted. But if there was not a woman present, they would talk about guy things. They would never talk about the kinds of things that really were on their heart.
So interesting. It's the power of our presence beyond what we even might be aware of.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So women need to realize how necessary, and in a very positive way, speaking up from what we know. And women's circles give us practice in speaking the truth. Mm-hmm.
I like to say, especially getting practice speaking the truth when you know it's not going to be popular.
Yes.
And in the courses that I've done, and the clients, that's often been something. It's interesting right now, especially. I was just invited to do a workshop for a women's group in Ecuador. And really what they were wanting support around is what I call the fierce feminine, really around setting boundaries and saying no. And it was just, interesting to reflect that that's not something many women feel as comfortable with, and it depends on the culture. But that was something they really wanted to do role plays around and practice and things, and because that's, I think for all of us, that's at the side that is sometimes underdeveloped. It depends on the woman, really depends on the woman, but giving permission for that and spaces where we can really start to, I think it's like another muscle of, of our strength, of our courage, of our willingness to speak the pink elephant in the room, and once we do, usually something else opens up, but being willing, it's like the courage really to have that. And I think, as you were saying, knowing that there's other women supporting you, whether it's in that room or in your women's circle, is a huge support and really can give you that courage that perhaps on your own you may feel like you don't quite have enough of. So, well, I want to ask you if you could just share people who are hearing this and want to be a part of the Millionth Circle or want to be part of women's groups. Some people could start them, and I think your book is a great guide for that. But for people who are looking for circles, how do they start them, or how could they find other women who might be leading a circle so people can be connected to this movement that's going on?
Well, usually one or two friends will talk about hearing about circles and want to have one. And it usually begins with 2 or 3 women who talk about it, and then each of them think, or I would suggest each of them think about the women they know for whom some element of spirituality is part of who they are. And to invite them to an evening at one of their homes to talk about forming a circle. And this is where I think the little book, The Millionth Circle, can be very helpful, because it then presents what the vision is. And if they come and learn about this and decide that, they want to do this, I think that it would be very helpful if they were willing to make first of all, to find a date in which they could all meet, which is not
practical,
the easiest,
but important. Yes.
And then maybe the commitment is to try it for like 4 or 5 sessions. And then be willing to make a commitment after that period as to whether they want this to be an ongoing group or not. And when it's an ongoing group, it can last the rest of your life. It can be one of the most important relationships in your life because it becomes, like the circle I've been in, we started, it's really about 30 years old.
Wow.
It's a long time in which we've seen divorces, we've seen marriages, we've seen the death of 2 of the children that we've had within the circle, we've seen the adoption of 2 children. Amazing what happens in the life cycle of women when you are true to yourself and you speak the truth to them and they know what you're doing is an amazing support to have. So I think every woman should have a circle, and that the realization that a circle energy is something that you can really sense and feel it. And there's no right way. there's no expertise. If one woman needs to learn boundaries, then hopefully the sisters in the circle will find a way to teach her about boundaries, and someone else will learn how to speak up about something or other. It's amazing. And it's like any kind of significant relationship. You don't necessarily marry the first guy you go out with.
But you not go to marry the first circle either?
Yes, it may not work out. The first circle may not work out, but don't give up on it. You should have learned something from what went wrong. I wrote from what I knew from the ongoing circle, and from what I learned from the most dysfunctional circle I was in. That's what I drew from. I'm in a number of circles now. Circles are a natural form for women too.
Right. I'm also in a bunch of different circles. But I love that you're making it accessible. And I know that we are coming to the end of our time.
Yes.
So what would you recommend for a woman who's now, ready to start a circle? Get your book and just jump in, start inviting women, or is there ways to find other circles that are already happening?
I'm not sure, because most circles, once they start going, because you begin to deepen, and then it becomes like a closed circle because of what you have shared. And what is said in confidence is held in confidence in a good circle, much as it would be in a therapy circle. So then my suggestions really is to talk with a friend about starting a circle, and talking among other women about starting a circle and trying it. There was a church up in the Gold Country that a woman started an open circle every Thursday morning or something. Anybody could drop in. Mm-hmm. That's the best model I've seen for a drop-in circle. That it met, let's say, every morning at this church. You can count on it. You could drop by because a crisis has just happened to you. You could go every Thursday morning because that's your circle. Mm-hmm. I think there's lots of creative ways to do circle.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for being willing to be the one of the mothers of the circle movement and making it so accessible. And thank you for also continuing to walk your activism in the world. I feel like you've really been such a beautiful example of walking our talk and taking the depth of your psychotherapy background and your deep wisdom, but also really bringing that into the world in a powerful way, which is what's needed. And I really see you as a model of doing that, and I thank you.
And it has to do with picking this up as an assignment. Mm-hmm. And I do want to add that to this, that if you want to be in a circle and you will accept it as an assignment, it will be meaningful, fun, and motivated by love. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole energy that accompanies you in what you do.
Very rewarding.
It is.
Sounds good. Thank you.